Yes.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go too in depth, but in terms of ult tracking, this is something I want you guys to be doing every fight, which is, for those who are unacquainted, ult tracking is at the end of the fight, you take a look at the scoreboard, talk about which ults were used or not used during a fight, and you determine as a team what ultimates the enemy team will have going into the next fight, and then as you get consistent at that, you can use that information reliably to start making decisions based on that. So, for example, if you know the enemy team has Shatter, and you are playing Reinhardt, then you're going to need to know that, or else you might get caught with your pants down because you get hit with an unexpected Shatter and your team dies, right? You have to block it as the Reinhardt. So, keeping track of ultimates is really important in terms of the playstyle we choose, and anticipating what the enemy team is going to do. There's a lot of macro decisions that are really important when it comes to that. For example, say this is like a really big example, is if the enemy team has 5 ultimates and we have 0 for some reason, the first thing we should not do is stand there and do nothing that fight. Because if we stand there and do nothing, they're just going to press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ults and just win the fight. In situations of extreme, when you're down, like the odds are stacked against you entirely, those are the fights that you want to get the most creative with. But anyway, that's getting ahead of ourselves. That's just something that we'll be thinking about and talking about later. For now, I want you guys to just be thinking about how to actually calculate the ults that the enemy team has. With the advent of Overwatch 2, it got so much easier because you can actually see the stat numbers from the enemy team, both in damage and healing. And that is how people chart their ults, as you could imagine. So, a little bit of a breakdown on how to calculate is each damage number point and health point is equal to 1. So if you deal 100 damage, you get 100 ult charge. Or if you heal 100 HP, you get 100 ult charge. Now the only thing that you should keep in mind is if damage is dealt or healed to a tank, it only gives 30% charge, or it gives 30% less charge, so it counts as 2/3 the normal amount. That's just that'll take some getting used to, like, calculating out, but otherwise it's really easy. And over time you'll get an intuitive feel for it, and you don't even necessarily always need the exact number to know that guy definitely does or definitely does not have it most of the time. And on top of that, you need to be keeping track of, like, in the middle of a fight, who used what, so that you're not caught unprepared. And it's a skill that takes time, so yeah, don't worry about not getting it perfect. So in terms of figuring out which ultimate costs what, they are all different, and it is a little bit of a what's the word?
Learning curve?
Yeah, a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit of a spreadsheet, just memorizing numbers. That being said, if you really are interested, you can try and look at the number and kind of just get a general feel for, like, okay, is this light compared to the others? Is this heavy compared to the others? Like, the fastest ult to charge in the game, let me scroll down. Here we go. Is Tracer. It costs 1375, so 1,375 points. That makes it one of the quickest charging ultimates in the game, which means it'll be one of the first to come online. And that would be an example of, okay, this one's really light. So just in general, you can expect after first fight, a good Tracer who is doing a lot of damage will probably have it, or she'll get it in mid-fight, next fight, right? Versus an example of, like, a heavy ultimate charge cost, which would be like Roadhog. His cost nearly double that, or actually over double that, I believe. Yeah, over double, which is 3,050 points. And you might be thinking, why is it so much? But then you realize Roadhog's a little bit of a stat monster when it comes to his self-heal. With, like, one use of the whole bar, he might get, like, I don't know, I forget the number it is now, like 300, 200, 300 HP healed. So they kind of, a lot of times the higher cost ultimates tend to be balanced out by characters that can like heal and damage. For example, Junker Queen I believe is also pretty high. Yeah, 2,700. Because she has a lot of self-heal. So you're going to have to take that into account when you're like calculating out directly. And that being said, like these numbers, they're good to like get the general gist of like how much each one costs. But at the end of the day, after 2 fights, if someone hasn't used if someone hasn't used their ult in like 2 fights, you just know they're gonna have it. And it's not that difficult to keep track of that. All things considered. Like it looks intimidating, but once you kind of get used to it, it's not that bad. In terms of practicing with intentionality, what I don't want you to do is to overload yourself and try and memorize all these numbers. What I do want you to do is try to think about the characters you play, and hold up. There we go. Try to think about the characters you play, and then think about, okay, so I already gave you the example of Reinhardt, right? Reinhardt needs to know when the enemy team has Shatter, for example, because he needs to be able to block it. Another big example is if you're playing support, you should always know if the enemy Tracer has Pulse Bomb, because who's the #1 target for a Pulse Bomb? It's probably the supports. Yeah. And like, even though you're Kiriko, right? Say, I'm Kiriko, the Tracer's never gonna Pulse Bomb me, right guys? Because I have Teleport and Suzu. Well, it's not just about you. If you use Suzu on something random, a good Tracer is gonna like see that Suzu come out instantly and be like, well, guess it's my time to strike. Or another example is Junker Queen. Her ult gets heavily countered by Suzu. How many clips have you guys seen? I don't know if you guys have seen them, of the enemy team, their Kiriko uses Suzu, and then the Junker Queen instantly presses Q and like kills 5 people, right? I've even seen like pro Junker Queens not ult the entire game just because the Kiriko held Suzu hostage. So, yeah, it's very important. And then another big example, usually supports, it's really big for this sort of thing. Say you're Lucio and you have Sound Barrier. You want to look at the enemy team and think, okay, this ult that they have on their team is probably the biggest threat they have to winning right now. So I want to save Sound Barrier for that. And on the flip side, if you look at the enemy team comp and you think none of their ultimates are threatening, then maybe you can use Sound Barrier in a more aggressive way. Those are just a couple of examples to think about. Yeah. I don't think there's much more to say, but yeah, so if you guys ever need to look, if you're ever curious about a specific ultimate and what it costs, just keep in mind this website does exist. You can look at it, you can get a feel for it. I would say being able to ult track is useful in your games at all times. It's always going to be useful to just be able to have this skill, because it means that going into a fight, you're going to have more of an awareness of what can happen, and once you start catching the patterns and realizing like, oh, they have this ultimate, and typically players with this ultimate use it in this sort of way. So like, say you've noticed that enemy Junkrat has been flanking with Riptire every time he has it. If you notice that he has Riptire this fight, maybe you just randomly pre-check a corner on the flank, and you just find the Junkrat just hiding there, and you're like, oh, I just get to kill this guy for free because I ult tracked. That's really strong when you can start getting outplay potential like that. Yeah, that's basically it. Or like another big one, Black was struggling with this. When they have a Reaper, maybe we should acknowledge that when the Reaper has Death Blossom, every single time that he's had it, he teleports into the backline and uses it. Maybe we should like be aware that once he has Death Blossom, he's gonna go for this play, so that we can anticipate it instead of just dying to it randomly. It's a really good tool when it comes to parrying the attacks of these players who, they kind of just, a lot of times players will just send the big ultimates at you in your face. But if you get good at understanding the flow of the fight and what's going to occur and when, you might be able to play cover in a certain way that allows you to counter it naturally just by like playing in the right position. Or even in pro play, if you have, say, yeah, we'll use the Junker Queen and Kiriko example again. Say your only fight, like ultimate to win the fight, is JQ ult. Maybe as a team we say, all right, this fight we really need to hard focus the Kiriko so that we can either force her to teleport out where she's not in range for a Suzu, or try to force her early in the fight in Suzu anyway. So maybe we commit like way too many resources just to trade the Suzu, right? But in the event that we get the Suzu, we can now get an aggressive Junker Queen ult, right? Which I guess that's not really an ult tracking thing, but I guess okay. If we're gonna make it about ult tracking, the enemy we have Junker Queen Rampage, and they have Lucio Beat, right? The Lucio Beat counters Rampage, so maybe we say to ourselves, okay, we're gonna hard focus the Lucio this fight, and we're gonna try and force him back, or put pressure on him, so that when we do go for the Rampage, maybe he's half HP, and maybe even though he wants to beat, we might be able to Ajax him, which means cancels Lucio Beat while he's casting it. Things like that really like step up the gameplay, and that's kind of where the importance of ult tracking can get on the long term. But on the short term, you guys should definitely just focus on making sure you have a good mental image of like what's gonna happen in the fight. And if you want to work on it, I'd say probably the best thing you could do, like I said, focus on the characters that matter to you first. So like tracking maybe the enemy. If you're a DPS, just for the sake of argument, say I'm gonna track the enemy DPS ult, just one person, and keep working that up until you can get used to tracking everything. Any questions?
No, sir.
Cool.
None so far.
I think there's a lot to be said about how to fully utilize this fundamental concept. But this is the start and the first way to look at it that will kind of help you begin to level up your nuanced gameplay, basically. So yeah, I'll stop recording.